iHeartRadio presents Podversations, a weekly discussion with the biggest names and influencers in podcasting.
Hey, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for this week's edition of the iHeartPodcast webinar speaker series. We have been doing these for almost 2 years. It's still my favorite part of the week, every week, where I get to sort of stop down and talk to a couple creators and podcasters that iHeart is in business with, in partnership with. And today is a very cool session for me because we're going to talk about a podcast that we turned around pretty fast and got out there into the world pretty fast with two creators and storytellers that we really like a lot and who jumped into this project with us with a lot of trust and faith of like, yeah, I think this is a cool idea. Let's see what happens. And I think a lot of what this is a conversation as much about you guys as it is about creating an idea fast and iterating in public, figuring out what something looks and sounds like in front of the public. Digital is really good at this, and this is a good example of that. But first, let me say who the heck you guys are. So Leah Lamar and Teddy Mellencamp, first of all, thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today for a half hour to talk.
And we are happy to be here.
Yeah, of course. This is very exciting.
The challenge with sort of like saying what people do is in today's world, everybody does more than what you could summarize in a few words. But at least I'll say, Leah, you are a stand-up comedian. You're an actress. You're a social influencer. You're now a podcaster. And you do a lot more than that. And I get that. And we'll get into a lot of it. Teddy, you are known for several seasons of Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. You're a competitive equestrian at a young age. Is that real?
It's real. It's what I did before I became a housewife.
So what stop everything. Let's tell that story, please. What's happening there? What's going on?
I think a new crime that we're exploring right now is that I had no idea about this.
That's growing up, I rode horses growing up, I rode horses and traveled around the country. And that was my thing. Like my parents got divorced. I needed an outlet to avoid the whole thing. So I sunk my teeth into riding horses, became obsessed with it. Then as a young adult, I came out to LA to become an actress, didn't make it. So I went back to riding and did that for 15 years before meeting my husband, getting married, and then getting cast on Real Housewives of Beverly Hills.
Wow, there's a lot in what you just said. So you go out to LA and you try to make it as an actress and you don't. What happened?
Well, it leads me to what started my business all in. Well, I came out to LA and the deal that my parents made with me was like, listen, if you want to come to LA, that's fine, but we're not paying for you. So you have to figure it out on your own. And I was like, okay. So I came out, I got a job at CAA in the mailroom. I grew up in a small town. So, now I'm in the big town and I really felt lost. And I felt, it was all of a sudden, like I was really trying to figure so many things out in my life. And I started struggling with my weight and I had already gotten a manager and I started going out for pilot season. And I was also gaining a lot of weight at the same time. And I booked something and then there was like a 2-month turnaround before it happened. And I saw the people and they said, listen, we can't keep you cast at your current weight. So you either need to lose weight or you're not in the show. And I never went into another audition again. Like it was like heartbreaking to me. 19-year-old me was just torn by it. And that became like a body image lifestyle change for me that it took me until into my 30s to really get a handle on. And that's why I've been so open and vulnerable about it. And that's my story.
And I'll hang with it for just a second, then jump over to you, Leah. But I don't want to put ideas in your head or words in your mouth. Is there an element though of podcasting, obviously an audio only medium, not at least first, not a visual medium? Does that feel different, more free, easier because of that background? Or are you like, no, it's all good. I worked through it all and I'm fine. I don't care what medium I'm in these days. Any of that?
I think the biggest thing for me has just been, as long as I can be myself, I'm okay. When I have to try to morph into somebody that I'm not, that's where I start to have that inner conflict. And then I feel like I can't talk freely. So podcasting is an excellent way to be able to speak freely and be able to share your experiences. And if people like it, that's what's going to make them tune in. And if people can relate to you or what you're doing or what your interests are or where you've struggled, you're able to connect with your audience a lot more than if you're, just pretending to be something that you're not.
Why is podcasting maybe a little bit better than other mediums to do that? If you think it is.
Well, I think, especially with all the different things happening on with Instagram and algorithms and everything shifting and about engagement and a podcast, you can just put it out there and you can put it all on the table and people have the choice to tune in or not. Whereas I do so much business on my Instagram that I have to keep it a little bit lighter because I don't want to be shadow banned, or I don't want, I have to continue it to be my place of business. I have to be able to do ads through it. I have to be able to do all of those things. Or a podcast, I can just be me.
So Leah, you are, I listed off all the stuff at least that you do, but you and I had brunch at the iHeartRadio Music Festival a few months ago. That was a big deal for our company because it was like our big return to, after a bit of a lull, our big return to live events. And there was so much going on in the background of that lunch of us trying to get this live event right as the world's still kind of inching out of, and still kind of inching out of quarantine and all the things that are involved in that. And in the middle of this big, crazy weekend, we had this great lunch with a few people, and you came on our radar in a big way as somebody who was just crushing it on Clubhouse. And we started to think about, at the time, you were sort of what's called the face of Clubhouse, which is literally the face on that app as it sits on your phone. You are, I think it's fair to say, first and foremost, a comedian amongst the other things that you do. So let me start with just a sort of a pointed, specific question. In a year like 2021 and maybe 2020 to 2021, is comedy harder than it's ever been? Because I don't know which one's right. Either everything's really funny now because it's so absurd, or nothing's funny because everything's so pretty real now. Like, how do you navigate the world of comedy in the last 24 months?
That's a great question, Conal. I think we're all still trying to figure that out. It's been a difficult 2 years. First of all, obviously, when travel was off, everyone was doing Zoom shows or Clubhouse shows. And it's interesting because stand-up feels like it should be in front of a live audience where you can see people, you could touch them, you could smell them, you can have live interactions with them. And we figured out how to adapt to Zoom and to Clubhouse audiences. And of course, Clubhouse doesn't even have visual. So there you're just focusing on actual joke structure and how good your jokes are, rather than relying on any sort of physical comedy whatsoever. You don't even have to have a big name. You can just hop on, and if you're funny, you're funny. Which actually I think is the way that I was able to excel on Clubhouse, because it lowered the barrier to entry, and it just allowed talent to rise to the top, especially if you were willing to seek out the opportunity and put the hard work in. However, I think the question you're actually asking me is, in this political climate, how difficult is comedy right now? I think between the pandemic and political unrest and the way that society appears to be crumbling and heading toward an apocalypse, I think that people are dying to laugh. And depending on where you go, I performed in a lot of red states this year because that was mostly what was open. Depending where you go, certain jokes are acceptable. And I prefer to tailor my jokes to my audience. I tried a couple of jokes in New York that just did not fly. And I realized that anywhere you go, if you're in a blue state or a red state, it's important to make sure that you read the room. And so, I've got Biden jokes, I've got Trump jokes, I've got jokes of all sorts. I've got pandemic jokes, but I am watching Dave Chappelle speak about the transgender community, and there being an outcry against it. I'm being censored by my throat. Thank you. And, we're all very fearful of censorship now. But I think what whether or not you agree with Dave Chappelle or liked his current special, I think that the battle is whether or not people are allowed to be censored, and if so, how and to what extent. So for people who aren't doing risque material, nothing has changed. But for people who really want to speak on what's happening in the current climate in the world, they may have more of a challenge depending on whether they're performing in a red state or a blue state or have a special on Netflix or don't. So it's difficult, but it's definitely manageable.
It's so interesting, the stuff you're talking to there, because as you were saying it out loud, I was sort of like, a lot of that, Dave Chappelle specifically, we all sort of lived through very recently, very really. So one of our other podcasters is Flame Monroe. She does a podcast with us. She also did a live performance for us in Atlanta to mark the 1-year anniversary of a podcast network that we support called The Black Effect. And when she was on stage, she talked a lot because it had just happened. She talked about The Closer, Dave Chappelle's show. And a couple weeks later, she was invited she is a trans comedian. I should preface this by saying that. And a couple weeks later, she was invited by Dave to open one of his shows. And it's just it's all shifting in very real time is the best way I can put it. Mm-hmm. Where you're and you're right. At the same time, we have, dear friends and contacts who work at these companies, including Netflix. And there was real conversation, I should say, going on inside that company of like, what does this mean? What does it mean we stand for? What do I do now as an employee of this place? Does that track run in your background now as a comedic creator, for lack of a better word, where you're like, I can't quite do as good a job as I used to because now I have this thing in my head? Or how do you handle it?
I think for me, I have edgy material, but I don't touch on subjects particularly that might upset people. And, some people might think that that's not the right way to do comedy, but there's no right way to do comedy. And I just do what's funny to me. And so I actually have a friend who's transgender, and she opens for Dave as well. Comedian Pink Fox. She's hilarious. And I think the trans community will be split on the issue. She's not offended. She opens for Dave. There are other people who are going to be offended. I mean, Dave said he would talk to anyone at Netflix who was upset about the show. And then he said, under the condition that 1, they met him at a place of his choosing. 2, they met him at a time of his choosing. And 3, they also explained why he's the greatest comedian of all time. So, that's Dave for you. I just think that it is difficult for some comedians who are rather outspoken about certain issues. And if you are speaking about the current climate, you're going to get pushback from someone. But I also think that part of comedy is that not everyone's supposed to like you.
That's part of life.
In life, exactly. Not everyone's going to like you. I mean, I'm at my parents' house. They don't like me, but we're making it work.
I hear you.
They don't like me, but they love me.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to amend it too, just for the record.
Neither do my plans.
Teddy, back to you. In some way, shape, or form, you guys, you're a storyteller, a content creator, whatever term you want to put on it. You connect with audiences. When did that start for you? Where did that come from? Was there a friend as a kid, or a mom or a dad or an uncle or somebody that you're like, oh wow, this craft of storytelling, of making quote unquote content, can you trace it back to some inspiration like that?
I mean, I could probably trace it back to like my parents getting divorced and wanting attention and figuring out ways to get it, and figuring out funny stories to tell, or figuring out how I can connect with somebody by being more open, and just seeing the ways that people will open up to you when you open up to them. And I think that that's what being a storyteller is. It's like taking your real life highs and lows and sharing it with the people in your life. And then, sometimes you add a little sauce to the tacos to like really, really bring it in. And that's key to what I do. And it's what I love. And I would do it anyway. Even if I didn't have a platform, it's who I've been my entire life. And I always say people either love me or they hate me. There's no middle ground. It's not like I kind of like her. It's like I love her or she's the worst. And that's how I want to be. I don't want to be something for everybody, because being something for everybody means being nothing for yourself. And to me, that's not interesting.
We talked
Relatable.
Yeah, I think it is too. I mean, we talked before we went live on this webinar. We talked, Teddy, about the 412 children that we we have separately, I should say. But is that a lesson you convey to them? Is that something you say to them of like, hey, it's binary, guys. People are going to love you and hate you, and don't sweat it. Is that a big thing for you? Or
It's
you just let them figure
huge
it
for
out?
me. I'm not a person that thinks everybody should get first place. I'm not a person that thinks everybody's going to get invited to every birthday party. Like, my daughter came home and she was like, Mom, so-and-so had a birthday and didn't invite me. Who are you close friends with them? Have you made an effort? Have you asked them questions? You know anything about their life? Why do you care? Just because there's going to be a million times that you're not going to get invited. And there are going to be people that you don't want to invite. And that's okay. To me, there is nothing worse than like the participation award. Like everybody gets it. Because it doesn't teach us how to be adults. It doesn't teach us how to fail. And without failing, you're sure as heck not going to succeed.
Leah, what about you? Let's start with the first question first, because I imagine as a comedian, at least that's part of what you do. You develop, I don't want to assume this though, but I imagine you develop extremely thick skin. And you just build that as almost like as part of your craft. But first, origin story. Is there a person that you admired or were inspired by as a kid that you're like, oh my God, that's all I want to do right now is what that person's doing? And then that turned into a job?
Yeah. So I wanted to be the Jewish Britney Spears. And
me too.
I know. And I didn't have a big enough career for my dad to put a conservatorship on me. So I didn't get the chance to be Jewish Britney, and I didn't get a chance to be a pop star. But then I fell in love with Barbra Streisand. I'm also a million years old at heart, by the way. Okay, so then I fell in love with Barbra. If I say her name too many times in a row, I start crying instantly. Then I fell in love with Joan Rivers. Then I fell in love with Lady Gaga. Then I fell in love with Natalie Portman. And while Lady Gaga is not Jewish, she's Jewish adjacent in my book. And I think that I fell in love with all of these strong Jewish women who were very vocal, badass, and talented.
Yeah.
And they were opinionated and stylish and the powerful women that they are. Barbara's known for her, obviously her talent, but I'm sure a million people told her to get a nose job and she didn't. Joan Rivers made waves for women. She cleared a path for comedians, for women. And I think that without her, women wouldn't be able to do roasts. Women wouldn't be able to talk on stage about abortion or marriage or unhappiness or comedy in general. People didn't want to see women on stage or instantly thought women weren't funny. And then you see people like Natalie Portman and Lady Gaga, just these really exquisite women who are so multi-talented. And I really admired their work. And now you see Lady Gaga crossing over from music into film. And I don't think anyone is really one thing anymore. As you were saying earlier on the interview, everyone's a slasher.
Yeah.
A multi-hyphenate.
Yeah.
And so I aspire to be professionally a slasher. Yeah. Which does go hand in hand with crime, might I add.
Yes, it does,
but
which we're going to get into. But I agree with you. It's funny, like if there's one thing that I think I get right as a lesson to my own, in all seriousness, for kids, is they say sort of like, what should I do in terms of my job, my career and stuff like that. I'm pretending they asked me this question. They don't really.
I was like, how do they?
Yeah, you're like, wait, especially the 7-year-old. But it's, all I could say to them is, it's funny. I work in digital media. It didn't exist when I was a kid. And I work a lot in podcasting inside digital media, which didn't exist when I was a kid. And I think all you can do is be open to being that hyphenated thing and also open to things that you don't know, that don't exist right now. Like that's all I could really counsel you to do. But it takes a lot of openness, literally, to do that stuff. But let me get into to close us out in 4 or 5 minutes here. I'll stick with you for a sec, Leah. So we're sitting there in Las Vegas where the iHeartRadio Music Festival is about to happen. And I think night one had happened. It was Saturday morning and night two. And these just amazing artists that perform at these things. And then you wake up groggy in the morning and you go and have breakfast and you have great conversations. And we had a great conversation, a lot of which was around the tragic and still unfolding at the time Gabby Petito case. And we realized, like you said, I'm talking a lot about this stuff on Clubhouse. And in my head, in that conversation, I was thinking this would make a great podcast. And so that developed quickly into this idea to launch a show called Real-Time Crime, and co-hosted by you two. And first with you, Leah, like, one thing that I think helped us in developing that show was the speed with which we had to develop it. It's almost like we had set this deadline that was odd and artificial of like, well, the Gabby Petito case is right here out there in the world right now, and we'd like to be something of an authority on this. We got to move fast. But it meant iterating really quickly and figuring out, what does it sound like? What's the format? How often does it publish? Let's just get it out. And at some point it's like, I don't know, let's finish iterating in public. But what was that like for you, Leah, to do that process? And then I'll throw over to you, Teddy, about just talking about true crime in general and why there is this fascination with it and what it's like to be a creator. And you both can hit both questions. But Leah, first back to you, that process of iterating so quickly and getting your head around podcasting, what was it like?
Very stressful. No. You know what? I feel very fortunate to have been connected with the team. And Amy Sugarman was an incredible force of nature. And she pushed this podcast forward, and we got an incredible product because of it. And when we brought Teddy on, I was so excited because while Teddy says she's not a comedian, she is. And Teddy's very funny, and I enjoyed our banter. And when we realized that this show was, we were learning in public, essentially. We were figuring out what the show was in real time. And it was not a crime to do so. But we figured out that the show was going to be two funny women chatting about crimes that were happening in the present moment. And I think what drew us in about the Gabby Petito case, besides the mystery surrounding it and obviously the fact that it was an ongoing investigation, was that we realized that there was an opportunity to continue to follow crimes that were happening. And we could have done a mini-series just about the Gabby Petito case. But I think by the time we finally caught onto it with the podcast, people were almost done listening to it. They wanted it to be over. People wanted justice. People were upset. And they wanted to hear about something different. And so I think it's very fortunate that we called it Real-Time Crime, because then we were able to move on to new cases. And we love crime. Teddy and I get so into the nitty-gritty of every single case that comes through. I love true crime because I've always been attracted to bad boys, so I'm just looking for my next date. And, wondering who's going to come out in handcuffs, whether it's in my bedroom or in the courtroom. But I think evil fascinates people. And it's like taking a glimpse into someone's mind that we cannot relate to at all. And we want to know how they became this quote unquote monster.
Yeah.
And
I'll stop grandstanding. Yeah. And I'll pass the torch over to Teddy.
I just needed an excuse to do what I do anyway. Like, I am a true crime junkie to the core. My husband actually was like, you have a problem. And so I was so excited when this became a job, because now I'm like, I'm working. This is why I need to watch Women Who Kill. And like, because before he thought I was plotting his murder all of the time. But I think so many women, especially when we talk about, or so many parents, for example, when you have a bunch of kids, when you have a business, when you have 55,000 things that you're juggling, sometimes you want that escape. And sometimes just digging into somebody's life and needing to know every little crumb of details is what gets you through the day. And like, that's me. And like, that's why I'm so grateful to Amy Sugarman, because, I already have a podcast on iHeart, talking, housewives and all those types of things. But Amy and I have always been drawn to each other about true crime. We've always wanted to dig into it. So when she started working with Leah, she was like, I've got this great match and I think this will be awesome. And I was just thrilled at the opportunity to justify to my husband that there's a reason that I'm as crazy as I am. And now it's my job. So
I think as good a reason as any. And you're right, Amy Sugarman, we should give her a shout out. She's the producer of the show.
Yes,
She's been
props to Amy.
So many of our great shows. So it's an awesome show. And I appreciate you guys on so many levels, not just doing this conversation today, but jumping in head first into this show that we iterated fast. We launched fast because we thought the idea was cool, but we thought you guys were really awesome too and needed to be out there in the public and the podcast as fast as we could in this. So thank you guys for hanging out today. It's been awesome. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for trusting us to really dig into all the major crimes that everyone wants to know.
You might get canceled after the Ghislaine case. But we'll see.
I mean, we're today's podcast, it could potentially go south.
Mm-hmm. We might get shadow banned.
And on that note, when this airs, the podcast will not be live anymore. But you know what? If you can NFT this webinar, it'll be worth something one day. I really appreciate you guys hanging out. Everybody, thank you for listening to. It means a lot to us that you hang out with us every week for a half hour. Hopefully it's helpful. We will see you next week.
Podversations is a production of iHeartRadio. You can find more from the biggest names in podcasting on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts.